Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, we're going to talk about Sevilla briefly, talk about a couple of little interesting points with regards to the potential takeover of Manchester United, as well as go through the updated transfer chart, talk about the prospect of David De Gea's new contract, and a couple of points at center back. So let's get into it. So first, obviously, a big game at Sevilla today. Very bad record for United against them. Very good record for them in Europa. A game that is much more difficult than it should have been, considering where things were at in the first half, with the 2-0 lead at that time. And yeah, I'm not sure what to expect. No Bruno Fernandes. Obviously, it's going to be more difficult than usual, but Sevilla are not particularly good this year. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that they were even allowed back. We allowed them back into the game in the first leg. We should be able to take care of business. We've been all right. Personally, I would be going for Casemiro, Eriksen, Fred with no Bruno tonight. Casemiro and Fred as a duo have been very good in Europe, beating Barcelona. I think the extra energy allows you to, especially away from home, a place like in Spain, will allow them to kind of overrun the team and really kind of just grind Sevilla down. So I hope we just go to really dominate them, but obviously we have Luke Shaw traveled, Marcus Rashford traveled, so got a lot of more options in attack and things like that too. Martial still healthy. I would expect to see, it's either going to be Rashford, Martial, Antony, or Sancho, Martial, Antony still in that front three. And it'll be very interesting. But I really hope United can get through. I think it's important at this point in time in the season. I know things are busy. A lot of people are thinking about, Brighton on Sunday, to maintain some momentum and be competitive in everything. We need to win some trophies. And keep winning some trophies. Moving on to the sale. There's just a small interesting bit here. Someone had let me know the other day that there were people from the potential sale parties looking around at Carrington again this week. And, there was another little piece of information that someone mentioned to me. United had some plans with regards to a rebuilding of Carrington somewhere else. That was very expensive. And apparently, just putting a few dots together as a small aside, it might be that the prospective buyers or investors were actually looking at, these plans were brought out for them to look at the plans to rebuild Carrington in another location, the training ground in another location. So that was something that potentially was being discussed this week or being looked at this week, as apparently there was some sort of final due diligences being done by the parties ahead of a bid due in about 8 days from now. So it's interesting, and I still think it's an indication that things are pressing forward as they should on the sale, and that we will hear in a week. You know where I stand based on the video I put out on Monday, that the stuff about the minority takeover talk, or Tuesday, things like that, not for me. I don't see it. Okay, so that's still where I stand. So now I want to talk about the transfer chart, because I've made some updates. There's been some things that have gone on in the last few weeks, months, contacts, different changes, and I want to run through this again. It's not my best work in terms of a chart, personally, in my opinion. I think the last ones were better, but it's hard with the situations being different this year. So let's start at the top. This has been pretty well confirmed across the board at this point in time, that number one is still that striker target, purchasing a striker. The three main names that I understand are Victor Osimhen, Harry Kane, Gonzalo Ramos. So here's what I want to say. I know for certain that there have been talks with the representatives and people around the clubs at each of these, with each of these major targets as well as others. to determine their pricing, willingness to join, and things like that. The situation with Victor Osimhen remains that De Laurentiis wants to get a bidding war, wants to get other parties involved, and at the expense, it's likely not to be a quick sale. That works to the detriment because Erik ten Hag is wanting someone in early. Harry Kane is pushing his way towards United. I still believe it's entirely unlikely due to the factors of Daniel Levy, the cost of Tottenham. Even you see some of the things that Daniel Levy has been saying in interviews and such about Harry Kane. But Harry Kane and his representatives are pushing his way towards United, trying to get a move to United, telling him he's very interested, telling him he wants to join, telling him he doesn't want to leave the Premier League. And if Tottenham end up not getting Champions League, it's a big factor. And so he's still pushing. He's still pushing to move to United. The issue is, of course, Daniel Levy. United would take him. Erik ten Hag would take him. And there's been some discussions around it recently. Not negotiations in terms of bids and things, but discussions. And that leads to, of course, Gonzalo Ramos, who's less talked about, been scouted a lot, been talked a lot to people around him to see where he's at, and is one that very much could be sold this summer. And so that's why I stay to continue to keep an eye on him, because of the difficulties of Victor Osimhen and Harry Kane, and that he's viewed as a very good fit for United. There have been discussions around his representatives or to get a measure of price when the deal could be done, all of that. He could be gotten pretty early in the window if United decided to move ahead with it. Obviously, you have the similarities to the Darwin Nunez situation in terms of they're willing to sell and all of that, and it could be done early. I don't think Liverpool are going to jump in this time, but anyway. And then on the list B, Šeško has kind of been pushed off to the side, is viewed as not ready and moving this summer. There's been some talk of Kolumuani, but as I've understood it as well, it's been mostly his agent offering him to different clubs, and he'd be very expensive and viewed as very high risk. Dusan Vlahovic can definitely move, but Chelsea are apparently leading the race for that as well. There's been some talk of Rasmus Højlund. I think he's been on this list a little while. I heard he was a legitimate backup option to the major targets, so keep an eye on that one. And then Vitor Roque, I know there hasn't been much talk of United, but I know that they've had some discussions with people around him, around his representatives, his camp. And so there's something there, but he's obviously also, again, on the list of Barcelona, Chelsea, and others. So talks are happening, and the situation is, if they cannot get one of those top ones, they'll look down to someone like Højlund or Roque. In terms of sales and loans, Elanga will go on a loan. Ahmad could stay. It just depends on minutes. Pellistri could stay. You've seen this. There's been talk about a contract. That's all kind of happening, but I don't know what he's going to do. It's more likely now that he looks like he goes on loan if he signs a new contract. But it's got to be a good loan, and there's got to be minutes. And then Martial, obviously you can't really take what managers say. The biggest difficulty with Martial is his injuries, and his wages make it hard to sell him. If we get a big striker, then it's fine keeping him as a backup. Obviously he's serviceable. He's a really good player when he's available. That being said, his wages being freed up would allow for a lot more on the striker front. Moving on to the next thing of goalkeeper. I've been talking about this for ages, and people are still, unfortunately, somewhat surprised about it. It is priority 2, even though it's not being talked about here, because it has to be resolved. You have Dean Henderson, who may not want to come back, and David De Gea, whose contract expires in 2 months. So it is a high priority, again, even if there's not a lot of talk about purchasing someone yet. And part of the reason for that is the situation. You have 2 things that have to be resolved. Number 1 is David De Gea's salary reduction. It looks like, according to reports, it's getting closer and that he would stay. And what that means is then you have to resolve the Dean Henderson situation. He wants to be number 1. He wants to play. There's questions about it. There's questions about whether he's the fit for it, questions about whether he wants to stay at United, all of that. If Dean Henderson is sold, a goalkeeper will be purchased. If Dean Henderson comes in, then sure, you could see Dean Henderson and David De Gea as the 1 and 2 again next season, with David De Gea accepting a diminished contract. And I still believe that will happen. I know people don't like to hear it. He's viewed as a good leader by Erik ten Hag. He's viewed as a good locker room presence. So I think more about the Dean Henderson situation as it pertains to whether we get a goalkeeper or not. At this point in time, they haven't really discussed it yet. They want to see him come back from injury and all of that, and then, as it gets closer to summer, they'll discuss it, and pressing ahead with offering and getting agreement from David De Gea on a lower contract. Going down further on the list, this is where there's been a few changes to the way I was initially seeing it and understanding it. It's very clear now that there are two different profiles being targeted for the midfield. One is more of like your attacking 8 Eriksen type, and one is more of, a 6/8. And I think the idea is you replace Scott McTominay with one, and you replace Donny van de Beek with another. So you could have Bruno and a starting 8 with Casemiro, and your 6/8 would be, maybe somebody rotates or somebody who can play if you want to play a little bit more of a 4-2-3-1 instead of the recent 4-3-3 that's been being played. Now, a major factor in this is obviously the targets. If Erik ten Hag could get Frankie de Jong, then he'd be looking more at targeting depth for the 8 position. And I know Frankie de Jong is an 8, but targeting depth for the more attacking position and using Frankie de Jong, Casemiro, and Bruno as his main midfield, but that seems extremely unlikely, so we've got to go down the list. On the 6-8 kind of list, people who could back up and rotate with Casemiro as well as play next to him. You're looking at the major targets right now, as I understand it, being Moise Caicedo, Amrabat, and Thuram. And I think that Amrabat is one to really keep an eye on. Very much one to keep an eye on directly. I would very strongly think about that one, and that would be on the basis of Scott McTominay moving on, which he absolutely could, to Newcastle or West Ham. There's quite a few number of clubs interested. He wants to move on if he cannot get and have a significant role, which he's not likely to. Now, in terms of that, United have been in, and let me talk about the 8s, and then I'll get to that. This next thing. On the other side, you have Donny van de Beek likely to depart this summer as well, and Hannibal likely come in and stay. He could be that 5th attacking 8 because he fills that role really well. That's kind of his position. If you have Bruno, Eriksen assigning Fred with Hannibal behind them, then he could get some rotation minutes in there and start to work his way into the team, or he could go back on loan. We'll see. But essentially the main names there, obviously the dream name would be Jude Bellingham, playing in that attacking 8 kind of position. From what I have heard, he's expected to give an answer to all the clubs in the next week or two about whether he'd actually be interested in going. United have kept their name in the race, even though it's very unlikely due to the cost. Sabitzer is obviously kind of the fallback purchase here. Could be got for 15-20 million. He's been playing in that role, scored a couple of goals, has done decently well in that attacking role, but I don't think starting level player. The main names being looked at are Kudus, Mount, and McAllister. And there's been a lot of talk about those in recent days in the media. And the biggest thing is United were kind of let Brighton know that they're interested in McAllister and they're interested in Caicedo, but they were wanting to wait a bit. Liverpool have kind of jumped ahead. Liverpool are attacking this. They're going for Mount. They're in they've made their interest clear on McAllister, and they're talking about Ryan Gravenberch, another name that maybe could show up on this list, but I'm not so sure. They want 2, and so there's going to be competition in this position here. United are pressing ahead. I know that they're moving in talks for McAllister. I know that they've spoken to Ajax about offering Donny van de Beek in a deal for Kudus. So they're moving forward on this. And this is a big area of focus this summer, is getting in, ideally replacing McTominay and Van de Beek. Right now, I would say the most likely outcome, it's hard to say, but Kudus or McAllister for 8 and Caicedo or Amrabat for 6. And I would say it's Amrabat and McAllister is a good bet there. There's definitely a real possibility of that happening. So, yeah, real interesting. A lot of things up in the air there. At center back, it is expected that Maguire does depart as the more likely center back to depart, but United have been looking at different center backs. They're interested in Timber, and as I understand it, are still leading the race for Timber, who could also fill in at right back, which ties into the situation where Wan-Bissaka may not be leaving, and so right back could be pushed to another year. But Timber's there, Kim Min-jae is there, they're interested, and they've also been looking at Schürrle at Ajax, and they've also been looking at Inacio. So there's a few things of interest there. And, yeah. So regardless of all of that, that kind of wraps it up on the transfer front. I kind of jumped through all of this already, so that's what I've got. I just wanted to give a whole update on where things are at and let everybody know. So, yeah, I'll keep giving updates on the status of all of these things moving forward. Let's hope we get a win at Sevilla tonight. And if you have any questions, make sure to leave your comments below. I'll get to things if I can. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on, and I will see you in the next video.